Yes, Philippe Lucas is the Vice President, Patient Research and Vice President for Patient Research and Access at Tilray, a federally authorized medical cannabis production, research, and distribution company based in BC, and a research fellow for the Center for Addictions Research of British Columbia. His scientific research includes the therapeutic use of cannabis and psychedelics in the treatment of mental health conditions and addiction, and he's been invited to provide expert testimony before the Canadian House of Commons, the Canadian Senate, and the BC Supreme Court. Gerald Thomas is the Director of Alcohol and Gambling Policy at the BC Ministry of Health and a collaborating scientist with the Centre for Addictions Research of BC. He served on the Secretariat of the working group that created Canada's first national alcohol strategy in 2007 and has worked on several national and provincial health projects related to substance abuse and addiction. Gerald has led a small observational study assessing the effectiveness of ayahuasca-assisted therapy on addiction, with the results published in 2013. And then Elena Argento is a PhD candidate and a researcher with the BC Centre for Excellence in HIV/AIDS and a PhD student at the University of British Columbia. She investigates the social epidemiology of health among sex workers and marginalized populations, and her Master of Public Health project examined the structural violence among sex workers in South India. She's worked on multinational products in Guyana and Brazil, and her current research focuses on drug use, criminalization, and the potential therapeutic utility of psychedelic substances for improving mental health and addiction issues.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here with you all today. Wolfman is a stoic man in his mid-30s who spoke about how hate and anger was infecting his work and personal relationships. During his second ayahuasca journey, he encountered his mother, and rather than directing his anger at her, as has become their habitual interaction, he felt a deep sadness in her presence. Quietly, he asked if he could put his head on her chest. She allowed him closer, and he slowly lowered his head upon her chest, his ears suddenly filled with the dulled thump-thump, thump-thump that was likely the first noise he'd ever heard, and that ultimately gave him life. Upon hearing his mother's heartbeat, he realized that his seemingly constant hate and anger were actually masking a great fear, sadness, and loneliness. As he gained his new self-awareness, he was filled with a deep love and comfort, both for her and for himself. And he couldn't wait to share this remarkable catharsis with his mother after he'd returned from his journey. The ayahuasca study that we're about to share has been one of the most complex and engaging research projects our research team has ever been part of. And we really look forward to presenting our process and qualitative findings with you here today. Dr. Gabor Mate is a physician and author with over 10 years of experience working with addicts in the downtown east side of Vancouver. A few years ago, Dr. Mate developed a 4 to 5 day set of retreats called the Working with Addictions and Stress Retreats, which employ multiple psychological healing modalities as well as voluntary participation in 2 guided ayahuasca ceremonies. Upon hearing about this novel treatment modality, I was eager to study the outcomes on participants and began to gather the funding and the remarkable research team that made this observational study possible. In April 2010, I was contacted by the director of a health office of a coastal Aboriginal First Nations band who'd heard about Dr. Mate's retreats and about our intention to study the outcomes. He asked if the retreats and the associated study could be conducted on members of the band who were struggling with incredibly high rates of addiction resulting from multi-generational abuse related to colonization. We organized a meeting with the band council and the Council of Elders, who ultimately gave us the blessing to both proceed with the retreats of the study, and they even offered us use of the band's longhouse. The traditional longhouse was described by one of the retreat participants as being a combination of church, courthouse, and hospital. So this was not only a great honor, but also the most appropriate setting for the Working with Stress and Addiction retreats. A total of 8 participants, 4 men and 4 women, volunteered for the first retreat in June of 2011. The second retreat took place September of the same year and involved 12 individuals, including 4 participants who'd attended the first retreat. On the first day of the retreats, participants completed a series of quality of life and substance use questionnaires and measures in order to set a baseline for the study. These measures were repeated 2 weeks after the retreats and then monthly for 6 months. Participants resided at the Longhouse throughout the retreats, which included talk therapy sessions led by Dr. Mate during the day, and ayahuasca ceremonies led by Western and Shipibo ayahuasqueros on the second and third evenings. Staff from the band health office were present at all times, and following the retreats, they monitored participants for any adverse events, none of which were ultimately reported. A key part of our process was a strong commitment to the OCAP principle of First Nations research. OCAP stands for ownership, control, access, and possession, and recognizes the First Nations' right to ownership and control of research conducted on or with their populations. And while we wouldn't claim any perfection in terms of our implementation of these OCAP principles, we continue to strive to meet our commitment in this research project, and thereby we sought permission from the band to share these findings with you here today. Our initial study results, which included statistically significant reductions in substance use and improvements in quality of life and other measures, were shared with the band and ultimately published in Current Drug Abuse Reviews in 2013. However, near the end of the project, several participants suggested the quantitative measures we used didn't capture the totality of their experiences, and that we should have simply asked them about how they felt, what they saw, and what they experienced during and after the retreats. Now, we thought that was a great idea. So we proceeded to raise some additional funds and to receive ethics approval to add a semi-structured interview as part of the final follow-up session, with 11 participants ultimately completing the interviews. The semi-structured interview was made up of 3 sequential questions. 1, did the stress and addiction retreat have any impact on your life? Yes or no? And then if the participants answered yes to the first question, and all did, the next 2 questions followed. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being extremely negative and 10 being extremely positive, how would you rank the impact of the stress and addiction retreats on your life? And finally, please describe the impact of the stress and addiction retreat had on your life. Elena and Gerald will now share the qualitative data of these interviews for the first time here today. Thank you.
Am I on? Testing. Okay, so this qualitative analysis included 11 participants, 6 men and 5 women, with a mean age of 38. As Philippe mentioned, they were asked how the retreats impacted their lives and were asked to rank the experience on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being extremely negative, 10 being extremely positive. Overall, the majority of participants reported very positive experiences and gave a ranking of 8 or higher. There we go. One of the central themes explored in the interviews was the role that the retreats had in facilitating connection with spirit and nature. Some participants expressed that their connection with spirituality was intensified or renewed following ayahuasca-assisted therapy. And for those who had felt little connection to spirit or nature prior to the retreats, a profound sense of spirituality or appreciation for the natural world was discovered. One 30-year-old male explained, "I had no sense of spirituality before, really, coming clean and sober, even while I was going through like AA and NA. They tell you to reach your higher power or whatever. I thought that was a bunch of bull. But after the retreats, I've really opened up to spirituality big time. I smudge every night before bed. I pray and say thanks to whatever is out there, you know?" The interviews revealed that the retreats facilitated significant changes in emotional and psychological states that helped to alter negative thought patterns and gain insights into the psychological barriers to healing. As one 22-year-old female described, "It's actually helping me to do my psychological work. It made me look at myself and see how I react to the world and how I can shift in the way that I actually truly desire, which is, you know, unconditional love. That's where I want to go. And so ayahuasca has helped me the whole retreat to eliminate those barriers so I can keep on healing and go forward and accomplish what I want to." So participants described gaining a greater sense of self-acceptance and that the retreats generated a cathartic emotional release that enabled them to resolve conflicts within the self. Alongside the positive changes that occurred on an individual level, such as emotional openness and self-acceptance, participants expressed that they reconnected with family and friends and found that the retreats had a beneficial influence on their relationships. A common theme to emerge from the narratives was that the retreats facilitated better communication, less judgmental interactions with others, and this included feelings of love and gratitude. I was more of like a closed box when it came to emotion with anybody in my life, in my family. Relationships with my children. I have 2 stepchildren that I had no feeling for whatsoever. And since doing the ceremonies and the retreats, I've grown hugely, and that I can accept more. I'm more open to caring for other people rather than thinking that the world was out to screw me. I think I have more love and respect for the people in my life. More gratitude. One of the most profound and consistent themes to emerge from the narratives was that the retreats led to considerable reductions in substance use and cravings. Some participants reported that they completely stopped using all drugs, and everyone said that the retreats had a positive impact on their substance use. For example, some explained that the retreats allowed them to see the trauma that was being masked by substance use and helped them to recognize the pain and gain closure. The retreats put my substance use in my face, and I just faced the problems that I was having that was keeping me in my abuse. And it had mostly to do with my grief and loss of my twin brother and my infant daughter that passed away. And I just kept living it over and over again until I finally faced it. And I just feel that there was closure. I don't use anymore. I don't use anything. I don't smoke or anything. Others described that the retreats affected them very physically, that they felt a very visceral, physical rejection by the body to use any substance that was previously being used. There was an acceptance about the nature of addiction and deep reflection upon the reasons behind their use. When asked about how the retreats compared with other treatments, many said that their experiences with other approaches were unsuccessful and often left them with unresolved mental or emotional issues. In comparison, the retreats were reported to be more effective at addressing addiction and did so in a shorter period of time. The retreats allowed them to have a much deeper experience that helped to heal residual emotional issues underlying the addiction, which were not addressed by other types of treatments. A 55-year-old explained, "Other treatments sort of scrape the surface, as they say. This one got me deep, deep into myself, which I've never admitted to or confronted, I guess you could say, in other treatments. And this was just a mind-bending experience, boy. I can't believe what I'd seen and who I talked to, like my mom and my dad and my granddaughter who were in the next world there. And it really touched me deeply, and I think about that every day. So there you go." Overall reactions to the retreats were overwhelmingly positive. Participants expressed deep gratitude for having had the opportunity to experience the retreats, and they described the ways in which ayahuasca-assisted therapy benefited their overall health and well-being. In the words of one 19-year-old, "I'm looking forward to having that experience again. It was very much life-changing, and I don't know. It was probably the best experience I've had in my life. And I haven't had a very good life. I've lived a very shitty life around people and addiction in my family and everything. And it just doing that and being around all the people, and after the feeling, it was just amazing. I don't know what else to really say. That lifestyle is very hard to get out of. And I didn't think it was possible. I've tried to do it on my own, and I don't know what it was, but it actually worked." This last quote summarizes an additional theme to emerge from the narratives, which was the intercultural aspects of ayahuasca-assisted therapy, or the idea that ayahuasca is an important medicine that can be beneficial across different indigenous communities. "It's an Aboriginal plant, and we are Aboriginal people. I pray every morning that they let this be practiced within our communities. Because, there is nothing wrong with Aboriginal medicine bringing in to another Aboriginal community."
Well, thanks everyone for coming. I hope that those words were as moving for you as they are for me. You know, the circumstances that brought me to lead this study were quite amazing, and I could share them with some of you personally if you want to hear them. It was one of those magical ayahuasca things, but yeah, it really was. But I like to call this our humble study, not only because it was small and involved a small number of people in a scientific sense, but also because it really humbled me as a researcher. And the moment that became really clear to me is when the woman at the second to the last follow-up said, you know, enough with all this psychometrics instrument, why don't you just ask us how this was for us? So just really, really moved to be able to share this with you all here, truly. So how do I move this? Sorry. So the participants in the qualitative study reported profound and meaningful changes in at least 4 areas: connecting with spirit and nature, including enhanced sense of meaning and purpose in their lives; connecting with self, this altered sense of self and insights into their psyche, as some of those quotes were sharing; connections with others, these beautiful stories of these families that have been torn apart by addiction and other traumas, and how these medicines, or this medicine and this process really help them to deal with that and reconcile that. And then, of course, the interest of us was mainly in substance use, and the changes there very dramatic in some cases. So to summarize, I think I can say both external connection, relationship with others, including spirit and nature, and internal connection, accepting and reconciling unresolved repressed traumas, are now recognized as important facilitators to recovery from addictions. And I think that these are some of the sort of key mechanisms by which these medicines can help. If you can think those through for yourself, I think that's what we're talking about. The other part that I was humbled with in this study was when we designed it, we include measures for hope and empowerment and all the things that I thought were connected in my mind to addiction and problems with substances. But we missed one very, very important thing, and that was connection. And it was so clear as we interacted with these folks in this qualitative part of the study that this was so important to them. Like I said, the connection with nature, the connection with their spirituality, the connection with their families, with themselves, and within themselves. And so I want to take this to a kind of a different place, if you will. I want to let those words stand on their own, but take you all to a different place and ask you to do something that maybe be able to tie into what we're about here at this meeting. What you're looking at here is Ken in the room? Yeah, Ken Tupper. So what you're looking at here is what I believe, and Ken can probably validate this, the first time any government in the world had ever acknowledged that there was such a thing as beneficial use of substances. And this was from BC. I can't remember the exact year it came out, but it's been repeated in a few documents, official documents. So in BC, we have a government who recognizes that there is such a thing as a beneficial use of substances. And we believe that this continuum helps us to understand that there are 2 sides to everything, including substances, and one of them is this beneficial use. One of the things that happened when we went to the band was, you can imagine, this is a culture that's been decimated by alcohol and other drug use. This band happened to have the largest per capita use of prescription drugs in Canada at the time. And so here we are bringing a drug, some of them thought was a drug, and saying, can you try this? We think it might help. And there was all kinds of resistance. You can't imagine what that was like. But they were brave. They were brave as a community. And we sat at the band office with the picture of the residential school right in the middle of the table with the shaman from South America talking to the band and through an interpreter and convincing of this, and they went ahead. So here's what I would suggest. We have spent so much time as scientists looking at what's wrong with drugs and have forgotten this beneficial side. And to think about this in terms of connection, I thought up this little PhD sort of, oh, you can't even really see it, about connection. And what I thought was this: can we perhaps start to develop some practical, useful criteria for understanding when substances are helping us and when they are not, and relating it to this concept of connection? If we are using a substance and it is helping us to develop connections within ourselves to heal, like we were talking about here, or connections with others, or connections with spirit, or connection with the whole damn thing, right? If that is something that we can ask a question for ourselves and then make a decision. If it's not, if it's isolating you, if it's anesthetizing you or sedating you so you're not in touch with how you actually feel authentically, it's probably not helping. So I developed this little typology here as a start. And so I think here's a call for action for the people in this room who really care about this issue. It's not enough just to say that drugs can be beneficial. We have to give people the ability to make that decision clearer for themselves. How often do all of us sort of veer into not healthy use when we're stressed, when we're not feeling connected, when all the things that we use substances for? So I have a couple of criteria here. The first one is this one. Is it helping us develop healthy connection internally or externally? The other one I would give to you is this. Are you taking what you're getting from this substance and applying it in your life outside of the use to improve your life? I get disagreement from certain people in the substance use world by saying, I do not believe any dependence on any substance is healthy. I'll say that again. I do not believe any dependence on a substance is healthy. You have to be consciously choosing that substance and making a choice about what it's bringing you. As soon as you lose the ability to choose and make that conscious choice every time you use, why am I using? Is this going to help me in these senses that we're talking about here? You're down a slippery slope, and we know where that ends. Horrible, horrible places. So can we, as a collective here, think about giving people practical criteria for determining when their use, every single time you use, is it helping you? Is it helping you grow as a human being? Is it helping you connect internally or externally? That's my call. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We have some time for questions.
Oh, sorry, I just need to do this. I forgot. I really need to give some special thanks. First, Philippe, if you can stand up for a second. I'm just going to give this guy a great big hug in front of everyone because he was the reason that I got involved in this, and I'll tell some people the story if they want to hear it about how I got involved. So there's others to thank too. Participants, the retreat team, First Nations band, Rielle Capler, who's not here. Everybody who knows Rielle, just hold her in your heart. She was directly involved in this, and especially the qualitative work. Elena here, lovely colleague who wrote up these findings for us. I didn't think there was enough information, but she did it. And then the funders, we had an anonymous donor. Somebody gave 10 grand that we don't know who. Thank you so much. MAPS and MAPS Canada, Dr. Boner Soaps, the River Styx Foundation Ties, and the Center of Addictions for Research of BC. Yeah.
I'm from British Columbia, and I'm very happy to hear about this study. I didn't know about it, and it's from 2011, and this is 2017. And I'm wondering if there have been others or what the future holds for this kind of treatment, and if you have any log jams in the way. Thank you. Oh, my name is Marcia. My name is Marcia.
Yeah, I'm happy to address that. You know, about 2 weeks after we finished out the last data collection or the last retreat, Gabor Mate got a warning from Health Canada not to proceed with any more research, quote unquote, involving ayahuasca, or the RCMP would be the next contact that he would get. So Gabor is no longer doing this work in Canada. The amazing thing that did happen, though, is that the band itself found the work so beneficial that for 2 to 3 years after the fact, after we left the site, they kept bringing in psychologists and ayahuasqueros, Western and also Peruvian, to go through more ceremonies with the band. And this is a band of 900 people. And I'll venture to guess, they're not doing this anymore. They stopped a few years ago because the health office, the staffing changed, etc. But I'd venture to guess that for a little while in North America, they had the deepest percentage or population per capita of ayahuasca users of any population in Canada. And I'd heard, the last I'd heard, about 70% of the band elders and also the band council had gone through ayahuasca ceremonies. So it has touched each and every facet of this band, and it was really encouraging to see them continue to do it outside of the scope of the study.
My name is Brightheart. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a Zen priest. So the rat park study has always been fascinating to me, that when you talk about addiction, they classically use the thing, well, you give rats access to cocaine or heroin and they'll do it until, massively. But these are rats that are held in small little cages and have nothing else to do. So a researcher had built a rat park, with plenty of access to sex and community and things to hunt and, activities, and saw the rats, even the heavily addicted ones, quit using. And so I'm really glad to see you bring that correlation of the importance of being embedded in community, because I believe that healing happens in community. And so it's not really a question so much as it is appreciating that you bring. Humans are the most social of animals. We put ourselves together in these huge aggregates of millions and millions and figure out living together. And it's those people who haven't figured out living with each other, the homeless, the old, the elderly, the isolated, that are most at risk.
The traumatized.
Hi there, thanks so much. I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more about one of the last quotes about the flow of medicines between indigenous peoples from South and North America. I've heard this referred to as like the eagle condor prophecy. I don't know if that's, was something that got talked about, and just about the acceptability of the medicine coming up north.
It was quite fascinating. There's a lot of overlap between this particular First Nations band's traditional practices and what you would see in Peru. So both of them consider tobacco to be a sacred plant. Both of them consider and accept the fact that plants can have spirits. And so they were certainly open to this experience in a way that maybe a traditional, Western, Caucasian group would not have been. They felt far more. It was telling that although Gabor Mate's hard work during the day, and we have a lot of data on what he did, and it was remarkable to see him interact and have people reconstruct the way that they viewed their own addiction on a day-to-day basis, every day, over and over, getting to the source of their trauma. At the end of the first ceremony, we came back, or at the end of the first retreat, we left that night, and we came back the next day, and half the band members were gone. And they weren't allowed to leave that retreat space. So we were quite worried. We were nervous they'd maybe gone out to score, or we didn't know what was going on. It turns out that they'd snuck off the site to go buy gifts for the Ayahuasca and a gift for Gabor Mate. So they presented Gabor with a lovely blanket, which he was very appreciative of, and clearly they were grateful for his help and assistance. But to the Ayahuasca who'd come up from Peru, they presented a beautiful silver plate. To them, the medicine itself, the Ayahuasca, was the core of what they'd gone through. They'd had a lot of white doctors they'd worked with over the years. Some of them had failed out of addiction treatment up to 7 times. So for them, the real medicine, that what really cured them, they felt, and what really helped them, was that Aboriginal medicine that had come up from the south to help them in the north.
Hey, so the topic of Indigenous people and psychedelics, and especially Indigenous people being the source of a lot of our psychedelic traditions that we all have benefited so much from, has come up a lot in this conference. And also about the lack of access that a lot of Indigenous people currently have to psychedelics because of money, basically, especially when things are more scarce like peyote and people want them, who can pay for them. The people who don't get them are the Indigenous people who brought them to us in the first place. So what I'm wondering is there a project already that's like a crowdfunding or something, some kind of project that can be specifically for helping Indigenous people get access to psychedelic medicines? And if there isn't, can we make that? I'm really unqualified. But I mean, is that something that, do you know, has MAPS talked about that? Has any organization that anybody knows about talked about that? How can we make that happen? Yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation.